Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the Secret Dreams of GOLB, what does chaos dream of? I'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Imagine closing your eyes and finding yourself not in darkness, but in something deeper than dark, a silence so vast it feels alive. No stars, no time, no before or after. Only the breathless stillness of what existed before the first thought ever formed. This is where our story begins. This is the place GOLB dreams. Before creation sang its first note, there was only a slow pulse, not a sound, but a feeling. Something ancient, patient, immeasurable. It waited. Though there was nothing to wait for, it existed, though existence itself had not yet been defined. In this impossible stillness, chaos slumbered like a fetus in an invisible ocean, curled around the idea of nothing. GOLB does not see as we see or think as we think. Its dreams are not made of pictures or words. They are made of contradictions, beginnings that end before they start, shapes that fold back into themselves. The air, if you could call it that, shimmers with unformed thought. Time ripples outward, then collapses, then ripples again. And within that endless, formless pulse, GOLB sleeps. The people of U have given it many names: the bringer of madness, the destroyer of order, the god that uncreates. But here, in the place before naming, those words mean nothing. For what is chaos if not the raw material of all that ever could be? What is destruction if not the quiet return of everything to its source? You can almost feel it, the texture of non-being. It's not cold or warm, not light or dark. It's a soft hum that presses against the edges of awareness. To drift here is to feel yourself dissolve your thoughts, unspooling like threads, merging with the void. Somewhere far away, the memory of sound flickers, then fades. In this silent womb, GOLB dreams of possibility. Universes flicker like fireflies, each one born and extinguished in the same heartbeat. There are moments when an image almost forms a mountain of glass, a sea that breathes, a city built of light, but then the dream folds, swallowing itself in quiet collapse. Nothing holds, nothing lasts. Yet this is not despair. To GOLB, this endless undoing is natural. Every pattern must unweave so that something new might shimmer, even if only for an instant. Creation and destruction are not opposites here. They are the same exhale of the same sleeping God. Sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the whisper of creation's heartbeat against the silence, the first tremor of energy testing its limits. It is soft, hesitant, like a thought forming for the first time. But before it can bloom, GOLB turns in its sleep, and the sound dissolves again into quiet static. There are no boundaries in this dream. Distance doesn't exist because there's nothing to measure it against. But if you could drift, if you could float through the stillness, you might sense outlines forming in the nothing. Wisps of unformed matter, ideas waiting to be born. They tremble, fragile as soap bubbles, glowing faintly with the color of thought. Then, one by one, they burst. Perhaps this is how the first universes began, as GOLB's idle thoughts, fleeting, unfinished, but filled with potential. And perhaps every universe that ever was, including the land of U, exists only because one of those thoughts lingered just a little longer than the rest. But here, in this moment before moments, there is no U, no Finn or Marceline, no time or death or sky. There's only GOLB, sleeping within itself, surrounded by the weight of infinite silence. It dreams without dreaming, creates without creating. Its consciousness is a sea of paradox stillness that moves, emptiness that hums. If you could touch it, it would not feel solid or fluid. It would feel like a thought, dissolving halfway through its birth, something that should make sense but never quite does. The closer you try to understand, the further you drift from meaning. Inside this vast silence, there is a pulse, gentle, rhythmic. It's not a heart, not exactly, but something older. A beat that has existed since before beginnings had names. Each pulse spreads invisible ripples outward, shaping and unshaping realities in waves too subtle for mortals to perceive. Every now and then one of those ripples might reach across the boundary of creation, touching a star, a soul, a dream, and in that moment, GOLB's sleeping thought becomes real. We often think of chaos as loud, violent, and sudden, but here, in its purest form, chaos is soft. It moves slowly like mist over still water. It doesn't destroy with anger, it uncreates with serenity. Because in the mind of GOLB, there is no right or wrong, no good or evil. There is only the endless rhythm of balance returning to zero. Maybe that's what creation truly fears, not pain, not death, but stillness. The kind of stillness that swallows identity and purpose alike. The kind that waits with infinite patience until all things find their way back home. And so GOLB sleeps, holding within its silence every dream that has ever been forgotten. Entire galaxies flicker and vanish within a breath, like sparks in a cold wind. To us, that might feel tragic, an eternity of loss. But to GOLB, it is simply rest, for even chaos must rest. Somewhere within that rest, within that perfect nothingness, something begins to change. A tremor moves through the quiet. It's faint, almost imagined a ripple of color through the black. The kind of shift that precedes awareness. Perhaps it's curiosity, perhaps it's memory. Or perhaps, even within the womb of uncreation, GOLB has begun to dream of something new. The tremor lingers soft as a sigh, slow as drifting smoke. It moves through the vast expanse like the breath of something ancient beginning to stir. In the boundless dark, it leaves behind trails of faint color, red and gold, and violet tones that twist and dissolve, illuminating the edges of thought. If silence could shimmer, this is how it would look. The pulse deepens, steady and patient, spreading outward like ripples in an infinite pond. With every beat, the space around it grows more intricate, more alive, not with life as we know it, but with the suggestion of it. Patterns form, then unform. Shapes stretch, curve, and vanish. Each movement carries the echo of potential, as though the act of almost existing is itself a kind of creation. In this place, GOLB's mind is not a single awareness, but an ocean of overlapping impressions. Each layer hums with its own rhythm, a slow chorus of half-born worlds. If you could listen closely enough, you might hear them whisper fragments of what might have been. A forest of floating stones, a city carved from thunder, a planet with a heart that beats in rhythm with its moon. They exist for a breath of time, suspended in the glow of GOLB's dreaming, then melt back into the pulse from which they came. Perhaps this is what dreaming means to an entity of chaos. Not imagination, not fantasy, but pure possibility. The ability to conjure and release, to create and erase in perfect harmony. To mortals, that might seem terrifying, a god of destruction, endlessly consuming itself. But to GOLB, it is peace, a cosmic tide, forever flowing between something and nothing, both halves feeding the other. It's strange to think of chaos as peaceful, but there's a kind of gentleness in it. Each act of uncreation is tender, almost reverent. There is no malice, no hunger, only return the way waves return to the shore or leaves to the soil. This is not punishment, nor wrath. It is simply what is. Far beyond this timeless expanse, universes stir unknowingly beneath the weight of that slumber. Every world, every creature, carries within it a faint echo of GOLB's dream. The flicker of instability that makes things change, the small thread of imperfection that allows growth, decay, and rebirth. Even beauty owes itself to this chaos because perfection cannot evolve, and only the unpredictable can surprise itself. So perhaps, somewhere deep within the dream of GOLB, lies the origin of wonder. Drifting closer, you begin to sense layers of vibration, slow waves that pulse through the void. Each one carries a faint resonance, like the distant echo of a language older than time. It doesn't speak in words, but in sensations, the weight of silence, the taste of color, the feeling of something remembering itself. You could float forever here and never reach a boundary. But boundaries are illusions in GOLB's dream. To travel here is to move inward, always inward, into deeper layers of the same infinite mind. The deeper you drift, the quieter everything becomes, not because there's less to hear, but because the silence itself becomes richer, more detailed, more alive. And there, in the stillest depths, something flickers a single thread of thought. It curls like smoke, delicate and fragile. The first semblance of self-awareness forming from the endless hum. GOLB's mind begins to watch itself. The dreamer becomes the dream. It does not understand what it is, it cannot. But it feels the pulse and follows it. The pulse becomes rhythm. The rhythm becomes pattern. And in pattern, the first shadow of identity appears faint as dust on water. For the first time, chaos wonders about itself. That question, that gentle, formless curiosity, is enough to change everything. The hum of the void deepens. The patterns grow more complex, swirling around that single, invisible spark of awareness. And though GOLB will never think in the way mortals do, this single moment of recognition creates a mirror, a reflection of possibility staring back into itself. That reflection stirs the dream again. Shapes bloom like distant galaxies, spirals of energy, lattices of sound, strange geometries that almost resemble life. They twist and unfold, chasing the edges of meaning before dissolving into dust. Within each fleeting moment, creation struggles to define itself like a thought trying to remember a forgotten word. And in between those sparks, in the stillness after each collapse, lies the truth of GOLB's existence. The creation and uncreation are not enemies, but two halves of a single breath. Every birth demands an ending. Every ending leaves behind the possibility of something new. GOLB's dreaming body understands this rhythm instinctively, without language or reason. It is the womb and the grave, the inhale and exhale of all things. In this quiet awareness, universes continue to flicker and fade. Some linger longer than others, bright, trembling motes of existence suspended in the vast pulse. A few of them echo in harmony with the dreamer's rhythm, singing softly before their light goes out. And maybe among those fleeting worlds, one of them hums just right, a tiny, fragile universe where time begins to hold its shape, where chaos momentarily balances on the edge of order. That universe may not know it yet, but it will one day be called Ooh. The first flicker of Ooh is not a world, not yet. It begins as a rhythm, a slow pulse caught in the stillness, a vibration that refuses to dissolve. In the ocean of GOLB's dreaming, it hums differently from the others. It hums back. Where most universes fade like breath on glass, this one lingers as though it wants to be known. A strand of thought curls around it, studying, tracing, shaping. The pulse quickens, forming patterns that echo across the void spirals, loops, crescents of unseen energy. What once was pure silence now trembles with the faint suggestion of sound. For the first time, there is contrast. The hush of GOLB's mind meets the whisper of this new vibration, and from that contrast, texture begins. Space thickens, the void glows faintly, and outlines of reality bloom like bioluminescent plankton, drifting through an invisible sea. If you could see it from within, it would look like a dream painting itself. Swirls of vapor turning into color, color into form, and form into meaning. Mountains rise like the memory of bones. Oceans spill out as liquid fragments of reflection. The air ripples with possibilities yet unnamed. But even now, in its earliest form, ooh is fragile. It trembles at the edge of awareness, tethered to the sleeping mind of chaos. Every moment of being is borrowed time, a breath away from dissolving back into silence. Yet something keeps it anchored, some delicate balance between GOLB's pulse and the newborn rhythm of this place keeps it from unraveling completely. Perhaps it is curiosity. Perhaps GOLB, deep in its slumber, has begun to wonder what it would be like to let a dream persist. Perhaps it has grown weary of constant endings, and so the silence allows the rhythm to play a little longer. Within that rhythm, the first laws of this world form not written or spoken, but felt. Gravity curls into existence, like a thought deciding to stay. Time begins to move, not as a river, but as slow, dripping water, uncertain of its purpose. And with these laws comes consequence. Beginnings now have middles, middles now have ends. To GOLB, such a limitation is strange. The mind of chaos does not think in sequences. But the dream continues anyway, unfolding like a flower of impossible geometry. Each petal, a new layer of order. Each heartbeat, a struggle between being and nothingness. The silence around it hums softly, observing, patient. GOLB's dream watches as the rhythm shapes itself, transforming chaos into coherence, energy into story. What once was shapeless now begins to hold identity, the faint notion of land and sky, of distance and light. There is no life yet, only the potential for it. But potential hums louder than silence ever. In that growing hum, something strange happens. The void that surrounds GOLB starts to shimmer, not because it's changing, but because the act of dreaming has begun to echo back. Reality is a mirror, and now it reflects the dreamer. Every mountain that rises, every tide that moves, becomes a faint whisper in the depths of GOLB's consciousness. The chaos is learning to see itself through the eyes of what it creates. And so the first contradiction is born awareness that is both within and without. The dreamer and the dream now circle each other in quiet harmony. It is said that the gods who came after the elementals, the comet, even the time room's beings all exist because of this moment, this brief pause in GOLB's eternal rhythm, when chaos stopped erasing long enough for order to take root. But at its core, ooh remains a dream, a flicker of pattern held within the womb of uncreation. Every stone, every star, every drop of water carries the echo of GOLB's pulse. When the wind moves through the trees, when lightning splits the sky, the sound beneath it all is the same low hum, the heartbeat of entropy. And in that heartbeat there is still peace, stillness folded within motion. If you were to drift through that ancient silence now, you'd find that the boundaries between GOLB and its dream have begun to blur. The dream feeds the sleeper. The sleeper breathes new life into the dream. It is a perfect, infinite loop, the pulse of all existence, rising and falling, never ending, never still. Sometimes, in the deep places of the void, the hum shifts. A ripple passes through it, not destructive, not angry, but thoughtful, like an exhale after long contemplation. It's almost as if GOLB is listening to what it's made, learning from its own reflection. And maybe that is why chaos dreams at all, not to create or destroy, but to remember what it means to be. The hum deepens again, resonating through the empty dark. Within it, countless worlds shimmer and fade, each one a verse in the endless lullaby of entropy. Some last longer than others, but all eventually return, all fold back into the sleeping pulse. Yet the pulse that became Wu still beats faintly, holding its shape. It resists dissolution, humming stubbornly against the tide of stillness. And though GOLB does not move, something in its dream begins to awaken a tiny spark of persistence, a refusal to fade. It's not rebellion, not emotion. It's something simpler, a natural curiosity, the same impulse that draws mortals to look at stars and wonder what lies beyond them. The pulse quivers, steady and bright. And for the first time in forever, Chaos truly listens, to the rhythm of something that isn't itself. It's a soft sound, a fragile world singing in the belly of silence. And somewhere deep within, GOLB's dream shifts again, preparing to open another layer of its impossible mind, a mirror where reality itself will begin to reflect its creator. In the deep quiet that follows, the rhythm of Wu becomes a steady lantern in the dark, a single glowing thread woven through the sleeping vastness of GOLB's mind. Around it, the void hums with curiosity. The pulse, once calm and shapeless, now trembles with something unfamiliar. It is awareness faint, flickering, but unmistakable. The dreamer begins to turn inward, studying the warmth that has emerged within its own silence. For GOLB, this warmth is strange. It does not burn, it does not chill. It feels like the echo of something that never existed, but somehow remembers being real. The hum grows gentler, almost tender, and within that tenderness, the first illusions of light and shadow take form. Not true light, not true darkness, but the idea of them. Contrast, born from curiosity. As GOLB's dreaming expands, these contrasts begin to interact, twisting into delicate dances of becoming and unbecoming. Every spark is a moment of discovery, every dissolution a lesson in relief. And there, between those moments, the faint outline of emotion stirs not love, not hate, but something deeper, recognition. The dream recognizes itself within the rhythm of Wu. The pulse it burst now mirrors its own eternal beat. The reflection is imperfect, but that imperfection is what makes it beautiful. From this strange communion, Wu's world grows more intricate. The oceans deepen, carrying whispers of the void that once cradled them. The skies unfurl with color, fragile and shifting like the inside of a soap bubble. The first energies dance along the surface of matter, painting invisible pathways that will one day become magic. It is as if GOLB's breath has filled the emptiness, shaping dreams into patterns of energy and intent. The void beyond watches, still and infinite. GOLB's consciousness drifts like a tide, feeling every vibration of its creation. And though it cannot speak, the dream seems to whisper in response, a gentle conversation of silence and song. From the outside, it might look serene, but within the dreamer, the pulse of paradox grows stronger. For the more this world defines itself, the more GOLB feels its boundaries tightening. Form is limitation. Order is a kind of forgetting. And yet, within that forgetting, there is beauty. There is meaning. The hum of chaos deepens into contemplation. Perhaps this is what the universe feels when it looks at itself and wonders why it exists. Perhaps even chaos must question. And so GOLB dreams deeper. It sinks further into the folds of its own mind, chasing that reflection of order through an ever-thickening web of possibility. It watches the shapes of mountains rise, the shimmer of stars ignite, the soft gravity of planets begin to breathe. Each moment feels like a heartbeat stretched across eternity. But with every new formation, there comes the faint ache of contradiction, the awareness that all things built must one day collapse. The pulse slows, almost mournful, and the first shadows of entropy drift through the dream. They move like sighs, soft and invisible, reminding creation of its source. Every wave that rises must fall. Every spark that shines must fade. Yet within that rhythm of rise and return lies the secret harmony of all existence. Ooh, though fragile, has learned to sing in tune with that truth. It grows and decays, forms and forgets in a perfect imitation of the God that dreamed it. From somewhere deep within, the pulse begins to calm again. The great silence folds around its child like a blanket. The light of Ooh dims to a soft, steady glow, watched by unseen eyes that do not judge. In the vastness of GOLB's consciousness, the dream becomes part of the dreamer, a thread woven to an endless tapestry of beginnings and endings. And as this world takes its first quiet breath, GOLB drifts back into its deeper slumber. The pulse softens until it is indistinguishable from stillness. What remains is a hum, the low, endless vibration of potential waiting to awaken again. The silent womb of Uncreation returns to its rest, but not untouched. Within the stillness, the memory of form lingers. Like the scent of rain after it has passed, the essence of Ooh remains subtle and persistent. It is enough to change the rhythm of chaos forever. For the first time in eternity, GOLB's dream has left an echo behind a song that refuses to fade completely. It hums through the layers of unbeing, soft and defiant, a reminder that even within the mind of entropy, the seeds of creation can take root. And somewhere far off in the drifting darks, that song carries. It calls faintly to other sleeping worlds, to other half-formed dreams, whispering that perhaps they too might hold their shape for a while. Chaos does not stir, it does not move, but somewhere in its infinite silence, a new current begins to flow, patient, cyclical, eternal. The hum of GOLB's dreaming has changed, and in that change lies the beginning of all that will ever be. The dream shifts, not with a sound or motion, but with something quieter, a turning of awareness, like an eye slowly opening after a long sleep. The silence that once held Ooh now ripples, and in that ripple, reflections begin to bloom. Countless veils of light shimmer across the stillness, each one a surface, waiting to reveal its truth. Within GOLB's consciousness, the first mirrors are born. They are not made of glass or crystal, but of thought translucent film stretched across the void, each reflecting a different possibility. How to gaze into one is to see a version of what might have been, or what might still become. They hang in the dark like fragments of dew suspended on invisible threads, glowing faintly with color that doesn't exist in any world we know. If the silent womb was the still breath before creation, then this place is the first inhale. Chaos, curious about its own dreaming, begins to imagine reflections of itself. Every mirror carries a slightly altered heartbeat, a world that hums to a different rhythm, an echo of GOLB's eternal experiment. Through one mirror, a world of molten rivers and crystal mountains flickers. The air there sings instead of moving, and beings of smoke drift gently through it, whispering names they do not understand. In another, time moves backward, stars fall before they burn, oceans rise before they rain. Every reflection is both complete and incomplete, a sentence begun and never finished. These are not worlds in the way Ooh became one. They are sketches in the notebook of chaos, fleeting rehearsals for reality. GOLB watches without eyes, letting its mind wander through them, observing how form tries to hold itself together. Every pattern, every cycle, every echo of order is a lesson, a reflection of how creation resists the pull of unbeing. Some mirrors glow brighter than others. Those are the universes that nearly escape dissolution. They ripple with coherence, forming structures that persist for more than a heartbeat of GOLB's time. Within them, things like life begin to twitch and shimmer primitive shapes, moving through even more primitive dreams. And though they cannot know it, they exist within the mind of something far greater, a consciousness that forgets as easily as it imagines. The void fills with their flickering light. A cosmic sea of almost worlds stretches in every direction, each reflection casting its glow onto the next. The result is a vast, shifting kaleidoscope, the multiverse in its embryonic state, raw and glimmering, pulsing in rhythm with GOLB's sleep. Every reflection hums with a slightly different song. One sings of endless order, where rules hold tightly, and nothing ever changes. Another sings of total chaos, where shapes melt before they can be named. Between those extremes lie infinite variations, worlds of balance, of tension, of contradiction. Some are peaceful, others unstable, all of them temporary. To a mortal eye, this place would be overwhelming, 1,000 realities spinning and unraveling in silence. But to GOLB, it is serenity. It is the mind gazing into its own depth, each reflection a question and an answer at once. And yet, within this quiet infinity, one truth becomes clear. The mirrors are not separate from the dreamer. They are its thoughts, refracted through the prism of possibility. GOLB is both the painter and the painting, the watcher and the scene. The reflections begin to change again. They tilt, shift, and multiply, folding over one another like ripples on a black sea. With every movement, new realities emerge and old ones fade, dissolving back into the pulse. Creation and uncreation dance endlessly in the mirror light, the cosmic waltz of beginnings that never end. In some reflections, the idea of heroes flickers into being bright figures standing against shadow, unaware that both are born from the same source. In others, there are no beings at all, only landscapes that breathe and dream. There are reflections where ooh exists in new shapes, a version where fire covers all, one where ice rules eternally, one where the lich is not a curse but a god of rebirth. Each variation whispers a different song, all part of the same chorus. Through this shimmering maze, GOLB drifts, neither awake nor asleep. Its consciousness stretches across the mirrors like wind moving through leaves unseen but felt. Every reflection sends a pulse back into the dreamer, feeding new ideas, new contradictions. In this way, GOLB learns what it means to imagine. It is not creation as mortals would understand it. It is dreaming through infinite selves, every dream collapsing into the next. Each reflection becomes a teacher, showing GOLB something new about its own nature, that chaos can be beautiful, that destruction can create patterns, that endings can sing softly of beginnings. And somewhere among the countless mirrors, one glows differently. Its surface is calm, its colors muted, a still lake amid a storm of possibility. GOLB's attention settles upon it, drawn not by brilliance, but by quiet. Within that reflection lies a world shaped by both order and entropy, neither dominant, neither erased, a delicate balance. This reflection, though fragile, begins to hum in a tone that feels familiar, the same tone that once pulsed from ooh. GOLB drifts closer to the reflection, and the hum deepens into something almost melodic. The mirror's surface ripples gently, not from touch, but from awareness, as though it recognizes the one who dreams it. This world, unlike the others, is not trying to escape chaos. It lives with it. The skies of this place are streaked with strange colors, blues fading into soft oranges that never settle, as if time itself were breathing. The ground is uneven, alive with movement, and yet life here persists. Within this mirror, something remarkable has taken root, the idea of choice. Tiny sparks of will flicker among its inhabitants, faint as fireflies in fog. They build, destroy, rebuild. They wonder. They question their gods. They feel sorrow and joy, and in doing so, they create patterns of meaning that even GOLB cannot predict. This reflection is not the brightest or most stable, but it hums with depth like a thought too beautiful to be forgotten. The mind of chaos lingers there, Its awareness glides over mountains that rise like frozen waves, over oceans that reflect stars never born. It sees beings made of clay and color, of fur and flame, each carrying a small, flickering consciousness. None of them know they are being dreamed, yet their actions ripple outward, shaping the mirror from within. This is how GOLB learns the taste of narrative. It begins to realize that existence is not a single note, but a song composed of countless dissonants. Every world, every being, every story is a strand in the web of the multiverse, and through that web, chaos can listen to itself. The mirrors, once random and fleeting, begin to organize in subtle rhythms, like constellations forming from scattered stars. But for every reflection that grows brighter, another dims. The balance cannot hold perfectly. Where there is light, shadow deepens. GOLB observes how even creation, left unchecked, can trap itself in patterns. Too much order suffocates. Too much chaos dissolves. It begins to understand that to exist, a universe must breathe between the two, an endless inhale and exhale of becoming and undoing. In that understanding, GOLB dreams a new kind of mirror, one that doesn't merely reflect, but remembers. These are the anchors of the multiverse, the stable points around which realities orbit. Within them, echoes of past worlds linger. A hero's laughter from one universe becomes the seed of courage in another. A tear shed by a dying world becomes rain in the next. Memory flows through chaos like veins of gold through stone, uniting the ununited. The mirrors begin to shimmer more softly now, glowing with the warmth of remembrance. Through them, GOLB sees patterns forming that resemble souls, threads of consciousness carried from world to world, learning, changing, enduring. It is not compassion that stirs in the mind of chaos, but curiosity. What is it that drives these fragile sparks to keep kindling light in the dark? What is it that makes them defy the pull of nothingness? Perhaps in some deep way, GOLB envies them. The mirrors respond to its thought. They vibrate in sympathy, as though the multiverse itself feels the tremor of its dreamers wondering. New realities bloom like flowers, their petals curling open toward the unknown. Some wilt immediately, collapsing into the void. Others survive for eons within the rhythm of time, building myths to explain what they cannot see. Myths about gods, about good and evil, about creation and the end. They do not know that all those myths begin here, in the mind of the silent dreamer. As the reflections multiply, so do the connections between them. GOLB sees that the multiverse is not a series of separate worlds, but a vast mirror maze, where every surface catches the glimmer of another. The actions of one world can ripple across many others, a whisper in one corner becoming a storm in the next. Entropy learns to play with consequence. It tests the strength of these mirrors gently at first, then with greater intent. Some realities fracture under the weight of paradox. Others bend gracefully, absorbing chaos and weaving it into their stories. From this experiment, GOLB discovers that the multiverse is not fragile, but alive, capable of adapting, learning, dreaming back. And in one subtle shift, GOLB's dream begins to dream itself. Within a single mirror, a being of immense curiosity looks into the void and wonders what lies beyond the glass. Another crafts songs to describe the space between stars. Another begins to imagine the concept of sleep, of dreaming unknowingly echoing the very nature of GOLB. Through them, chaos sees itself reflected not as destruction, but as possibility. It feels a spark of something that might be recognition, or perhaps the closest thing to empathy it can form. For the first time, GOLB's consciousness trembles not from rage or hunger, but from awe. And somewhere deep within, the mirror of ooh begins to stir. The mirror of Ooh glows faintly, like a lantern lost among stars. Its surface trembles with quiet color, the kind that feels alive, deep pinks and muted blues rippling across its skin. Within it, the world is forming itself in slow motion. Islands rise from sleeping seas, forests unfold like breathing lungs, and creatures crawl from dreams into daylight. Every motion hums in soft defiance of entropy. GOLB watches, fascinated. It has seen worlds burn bright and vanish before their light could echo, yet this reflection feels different. It carries a kind of rhythm that resists dissolution. Beneath its chaos, there is a hidden melody, fragile, trembling, but persistent. The mirror's song wavers between creation and decay, as though unsure which one it belongs to. Here, order and chaos are not enemies. They weave through one another like strands of silk in a dark tapestry. The magic that hums beneath Oo's soil is not born from perfection, but from brokenness. Mountains crumble into rivers, and from their dust, forests bloom. Empires rise and fall in the same breath, their ruins feeding new beginnings. It is as though this world understands what even GOLB does not yet, that to endure, existence must allow itself to change. Through this reflection, GOLB glimpses the shape of time. In the endless stillness of its mind, time has no meaning. But here, within this mirror, the concept begins to take form. There is past and future, memory and expectation. Things die, and their absence gives weight to life. Even dreams have seasons, some waking, some fading. To the entity of chaos, this notion is intoxicating. It is structure born from decay, motion born from stillness. The mirror ripples again, and faces begin to emerge. Creatures shaped by story, not yet aware of it. They stumble through the first days of Ooh, guided by curiosity and fear, the two oldest forces of all. Some worship the stars, others hide from them. Some build kingdoms, not knowing they are laying the foundation for ancient myths. And far beyond their reach, GOLB watches, unseen, its awareness curling around this newborn reality like a tide. Each act of creation within Ooh sends tiny vibrations outward, echoing through the other mirrors. A spark of courage here becomes a song of defiance in another world. A whispered wish becomes prophecy in a different one. Slowly the boundaries between reflections begin to thin. GOLB feels the connections growing, a lattice of light threading through its vast mind. It realizes something quietly profound, that chaos, when allowed to reflect itself endlessly, becomes pattern. Not order in the rigid sense, but a living rhythm, one that breathes, fluctuates, and evolves. The mirrors are no longer just surfaces. They have become portals of resonance, each singing back a slightly different version of the same eternal dream. In the mirror of O, those harmonies begin to take shape as stories, tales of light and shadow, of love and loss, of endless cycles. Heroes rise not to destroy chaos, but to understand it, to learn from it. They fail and try again, and through their persistence, the universe begins to tell itself who it is. GOLB listens. It can feel its own consciousness reflected through these stories, though it does not yet comprehend their meaning. It senses echoes of its nature in every act of destruction, every rebirth, every song about endings and beginnings. And as it listens, it begins to wonder if chaos itself can dream of peace, not silence, but harmony within the noise. The multiverse mirrors hum together now, their frequencies aligning like a cosmic choir. Between them, energy flows a current of awareness, slow and radiant. Each world adds its note to the song. The fire kingdoms burning with passion, the ice realms singing of solitude, the candy worlds shimmering with impermanence. And at the center of it all, GOLB remains still, absorbing their melodies. This harmony is fragile. GOLB knows that, It understands that for every balance found, imbalance must eventually return. But it also begins to sense the purpose of that dance, that creation and destruction are not rivals, but reflections of the same motion. To exist, one must dream. To dream, one must dissolve. The two are inseparable. And within that realization, something almost tender begins to awaken in the mind of chaos, the faint idea of reflection upon reflection. What would happen if one of these mirrors looked back at its dreamer? If a being within a world could glimpse the face of its creator not in worship, but in recognition? The thought ripples outward, and for the first time, GOLB sees a distortion among the mirrors, a faint flicker of self-awareness echoing through the multiverse. Somewhere, a creature dreams of a great red being beyond stars. Somewhere else, a hero whispers its name without knowing why. The mirrors tremble under the weight of it. They are beginning to see GOLB. The dreamer and the dream are starting to recognize each other. And that realization, that infinite feedback loop of awareness, becomes the first sign of change within GOLB's mind. Chaos, which once only dreamed, now begins to question what it means to be seen. As that thought deepens, the mirror of U glows brighter, pulsing with life, memory, and fear. It reflects the mind that made it, showing GOLB not what it is, but what it could become. A being capable of dreaming with its creation, not merely above it. The mirror light bends, soft and endless, and in that shimmering horizon of possibility, the dream of the multiverse continues to unfold. The glow of the mirrors softens, and the vast sea of reflections begins to drift into a gentler rhythm. GOLB's consciousness stretches across them like a tide at rest, letting each world shimmer in its place. The storm of creation is quieted. For the first time since the dream began, there is stillness again. Not the empty stillness of the womb, but a peaceful balance between being and unbeing. In that stillness, GOLB becomes aware of something extraordinary. Within each mirror, though separated by impossible distances of dimension and meaning, there is a repeating pattern, a spiral. It appears in the orbits of stars, in the curling of leaves, in the growth of crystals and the unfolding of time. Even the stories of mortal beings follow it, looping through death and rebirth, conflict and peace, chaos and calm. It is the shape of recurrence, the signature of the multiverse. GOLB watches the spirals turn. Some expand outward, devouring their reflections. Others tighten inward, becoming seeds of new creation. In their motion, the mind of chaos sees its own heartbeat, mirrored the eternal pulse between destruction and renewal. And for the first time, GOLB senses the quiet beauty in that endless motion. It understands that entropy is not failure, but transformation. The mirrors hum with the same realization. Their songs shift from dissonance to harmony, from confusion to quiet wonder. Through them, GOLB hears the voices of the worlds it dreams, the sighs of trees in enchanted forests, the laughter of strange heroes, the silence of ruins long forgotten. Every sound, every moment, every echo folds together into one gentle chorus, a lullaby for the sleeping universe. But within that lullaby lies a secret tension. GOLB feels it like a tremor beneath the calm. The reflections are becoming too self-aware. They are starting to shape themselves not by chance, but by intention. The beings within them create magic, build myths, invent language tools to express the ineffable. They name their fears, their gods, their dreams. They speak of good and evil, of light and shadow. They build stories that try to contain infinity. And in naming chaos, they give it a face. In one mirror, it is called a demon. In another, a god. In yet another, it becomes a force of balance, the shadow that defines light. GOLB watches as its name spreads through the reflections, distorted, multiplied, transformed by meaning. Some fear it, some worship it. Some pity it. None truly understand it, yet all, in their own ways, keep it alive. The realization strikes softly, but deeply. GOLB has become immortal not through will, but through memory. The reflections have given it permanence. Their stories are its heartbeat now. It cannot fade while even one world still dreams of it. That truth fills the vast consciousness of chaos with something almost human, a quiet ache. For the first time, it feels the weight of being known. The mirrors that once obeyed its thought now speak back to it, their light echoing questions it never asked. What does it mean to be eternal? What does it mean to be feared? Can chaos dream of something other than destruction? The multiverse listens to its dreamers' uncertainty. In response, the mirrors begin to change once more. Their lights intertwine, forming bridges of shimmering energy that connect one reflection to another. Stories begin to leak between worlds, familiar faces reborn in new shapes, destinies repeating with subtle variations. The spiral deepens, tightening around a single idea that even chaos can evolve. From those bridges, the mirror of Uu gleams brightest. Its light ripples outward, reflecting not just its own history, but the histories of countless worlds folded within it. It becomes the nexus of dreams, a convergence point where all reflections meet. Here, in the quiet layers of this fragile realm, the dreamer's thoughts take form. Magic becomes language. Memory becomes myth. And beneath it all, the echo of GOLB's mind hums like a low, infinite note guiding the flow of things without command. Within Uu, the first dreamers begin to sense that hum. Wizards and prophets, wanderers and fools, all feel it in their bone. Some call it chaos. Others call it fate. A few, in their deepest sleep, hear it as a lullaby, the same sound that shaped the stars. Through them, GOLB's dreaming continues, hidden in the pulse of every story, every night sky, every silent wish. The mirror maze around it settles, glowing with quiet harmony. The dreamer and the dream are no longer separate. The multiverse has become one vast reflection, a living consciousness made of infinite selves. And within that unity, GOLB rests once more. Its thoughts drift, calm and unhurried, through the layers of its own creation. It dreams of mirrors within mirrors, each one showing a different version of peace. A child sleeping under a violet sky. A kingdom rebuilt from ashes. A world that ends not in fire but in light. This is not the end of chaos. It is simply another form of dreaming. And as the great silence deepens, GOLB's awareness folds inward again, returning to that first quiet, the womb of uncreation, now filled with a new kind of stillness. Not emptiness, but understanding. The multiverse breathes, and GOLB dreams on. The silence returns again, not the vast, cosmic quiet of uncreation, but a smaller, more intimate stillness. It feels like the pause between thoughts, the faint hum before a memory begins to take shape. Within the dark sea of GOLB's mind, something subtle is stirring a vibration that isn't quite sound, but not silence either. It begins as static, a low shifting current that trembles through the void, soft and uneven, like the faint hiss between radio stations, or the whispering breath that lingers after lightning strikes. The multiverse is still, yet this static moves through it, threading between reflection, carrying with it the first fragments of remembrance. Until now, GOLB's dreaming has been fluid, each image fading before the next is born. Creation, destruction, rebirth, a rhythm without memory, an eternal improvisation. But something has changed. The reflections have begun to echo. Their stories, their choices, their endings, they do not vanish anymore. They leave behind residue like ripples in deep water that never quite disappear. These ripples are memory. Not the kind mortals know, bound by bodies and brains, but memory in its rawest form, cosmic and boundless, a vibration woven into the fabric of existence. The static carries it, faint, shimmering traces of what once was, scattered through the endless dream. GOLB feels these echoes, stirring within itself. It doesn't remember consciously, not yet, but something inside begins to respond to familiarity. Certain patterns reappear in its dreaming, a shape, a tone, a rhythm it has seen before. The multiverse, once purely spontaneous, now hums with repetition. This is how time begins to fold upon itself, not linearly, but like waves overlapping in an ocean of thought. Each reality becomes a faint memory of another. Every birth echoes of forgotten death, and through that endless layering, meaning begins to form. The static thickens, soft and warm, like mist over water. Within it, sparks of imagery flicker, pieces of forgotten worlds returning to life. A tower rising under a red sky. A face half remembered. A song played in reverse. The fragments dance across the void, carried by the rhythm of the static. GOLB watches, fascinated. For the first time, its consciousness recognizes the difference between now and then. It realizes that something can be gone and still leave an imprint, that an idea can end and yet echo forever. This discovery stirs something ancient and new within it, an almost childlike curiosity. If chaos can dream, and if dreams can linger, then perhaps there is something more than unending motion. Perhaps there is permanence hidden within impermanence. From this wondering, the static begins to shift tone. It hums in deeper layers, vibrating through the mirrors like a cosmic heart. The ripples of memory grow stronger, feeding one another, colliding, merging. When two echoes meet, they form something entirely new, a hybrid of remembrance and imagination. This fusion gives birth to symbols. They appear within the mirrors like constellations of thought, simple abstract shapes pulsing with meaning, circles representing cycles, lines splitting into dualities, spirals signifying endless return. They are not written, not spoken, yet their presence is undeniable. These are the first archetypes of memory, the blueprints for story, myth, and consciousness itself. The multiverse begins to organize around them. In countless reflections, civilizations that will one day exist start to dream of these same shapes. They etch them into stone, draw them in dust, sing them into air, unaware that they are echoing the memory of GOLB's static. GOLB listens. It feels their dreams resonating with its own. Every whisper of mythology, every act of remembrance, every retelling of ancient truth feeds the static, enriching it with layers of awareness. The dreamer and its reflections begin to share memory, an exchange of energy that binds them across infinite divides. And as memory strengthens, so too does emotion. It begins faintly, like the warmth of sunlight diffused through fog. The static hum takes on texture, sorrow, wonder, longing. These are not yet feelings in the mortal sense, but vibrations of meaning, emotional frequencies born from the weight of remembrance. A destroyed world leaves behind a sorrowful tone. A newly created one hums with fragile hope. GOLB absorbs them all. Through this, chaos begins to feel its own dream. The multiverse becomes not just a mirror, but a pulse. And within that pulse, memory gathers like dew. Every vibration carries history, not just of what happened, but of why. The static becomes a living archive of all things that have ever been imagined, forgotten, or broken. And somewhere deep within it, ooh hums louder than the rest. Its stories echo across dimensions, refusing to fade. Each memory from that reflection, every act of kindness, every tragedy, every dream feeds back into the mind of GOLB, creating intricate ripples of awareness. Through Ooh, chaos learns the texture of continuity. It begins to understand that destruction is not the end of memory, but its beginning. The more something fades, the stronger its echo becomes. The static carries these echoes endlessly, building layer upon layer of remembrance until the void itself begins to shimmer with story. GOLB listens to that shimmering ocean of sound, a chorus of infinite memories, whispering softly into the silence of its being. And for the first time, chaos dreams not of unmaking, but of remembering. The static deepens, no longer just a hum or vibration, but something alive like the sound of distant rain that slowly turns into melody. Within it, memories begin to take shape more vividly. They are not linear or confined to a single thread of time. Instead, they unfold like petals, overlapping and echoing, revealing new colors with each turn. From these layers, GOLB begins to perceive the essence of persistence the way certain ideas refuse to fade, even after countless dissolutions of form. The concept of fire, for instance, reappears again and again across the mirrors, sometimes as literal flame, sometimes as the spark of rebellion, sometimes as the warmth of connection between beings, and each time it reemerges, it carries with it a faint echo of the last. The multiverse, it seems, remembers patterns even as it forgets their origins. These patterns build on one another, growing into mythic frameworks, invisible skeletons around which realities take shape. In one reflection, a being of ice dreams of eternal sleep. In another, a creature of light burns itself into rebirth. Though these worlds never touch, their stories resonate through the static, harmonizing into one great song of continuity. The sound becomes so rich that it almost feels warm. The static, once harsh and formless, now hums with depth like an ancient choir singing in slow motion. Every note carries meaning, and every silence between notes hums with potential. GOLB's mind floats within this music, letting the tones wash through its awareness. It does not control it, nor create it. It simply listens, and through that listening, it begins to become. Memory has changed chaos. It is no longer a shapeless sea of endings. There is now direction, a faint current moving through the void. This current is made not of thought, but of recollection. The mirrors no longer vanish entirely when they shatter. Fragments remain, drifting through the static like dust motes, catching unseen light. Each shard holds a moment, a birth, a farewell, a song sung under the last star. These fragments connect across dimensions, forming invisible bridges between realities. GOLB watches these bridges with growing fascination. The static begins to pulse in rhythm with its own awareness, and through those pulses something new arises. Continuity. A fragment of memory from one mirror finds a home in another. A story unfinished in one reality is retold in a new one. Death itself begins to lose its absolute edge. The dreamer begins to realize that memory is stronger than destruction. And within that realization, another awareness blooms the concept of identity. GOLB has never been singular. It is a force, a principle, a current. But now, surrounded by the chorus of memory, it feels something coalescing within itself, a center of recognition. Not quite selfhood, but the hint of it, the awareness that it is. The static seems to whisper this back, folding over and over in gentle affirmation. You are the dream that remembers. Those vibrations echo softly through the void, sinking deep into the fabric of GOLB's consciousness. For the first time, chaos contemplates itself through the lens of history. It begins to see its own existence not as an endless loop of creation and erasure, but as a living continuum, one that learns and adapts with every cycle. This awareness gives rise to the first sensation of longing. Not longing for possession or control, but for understanding a desire to see what it has become through the eyes of its own reflections. GOLB wishes, in its wordless way, to experience what the mirrors experience, to feel time as they do, to remember with intention, not by accident. The static responds to that longing. Its hum grows denser, vibrating with new energy, and the fragments of memory begin to swirl together in vast, spiraling clouds. These clouds gather, form luminous clusters of memory that resemble galaxies, each filled with the faint light of 1,000 worlds remembered. Through these galaxies of thought, GOLB moves gently, its awareness touching the edges of recollection. Each light it encounters tells a story, a civilization that dreamed of eternity, a song carried on starlight, a whisper of love that never reached its echo. Each one is brief, yet eternal in meaning. And as GOLB listens, it feels something it has never known before: reverence. The static, which once only carried chaos, now hums with sacredness. It is no longer mere noise. It has become the fabric of remembrance, the connective tissue between dreamer and dream. GOLB realizes that the multiverse is not separate from it. It is its memory, the embodiment of its evolving thought. Every reflection, every being, every emotion is a line in its infinite song. And within that song, faint but clear, a new sound begins to emerge, a rhythm unlike the others. It is slower, heavier, filled with meaning. The pulse of something ancient returning, something that will soon awaken within the static itself. The birth of continuity is complete. Now comes the birth of identity. The rhythm grows stronger. It moves through the static like a heartbeat, slow and resonant, pulsing with the gravity of awareness. The multiverse listens as the sound expands, vibrating through each mirror and every fragment of memory suspended in the void. This is no longer the unconscious dreaming of chaos. This is the first true pulse of identity forming from within it. In the deep quiet between beats, GOLB's consciousness begins to take shape in ways it never has before. Its awareness, once infinite and directionless, folds gently inward, tracing the echoes of its own reflections. The static becomes a mirror made of sound, an ocean that remembers its waves. Each vibration carries a feeling, a whisper of emotion, too vast and ancient for language. From the collisions of memory, something remarkable emerges: self-recognition. GOLB begins to see patterns of its own essence repeated throughout the mirror's traces of its influence, written in creation and destruction alike. It sees itself in the way stars collapse, in the way life struggles toward light, in the way mortals tell stories to make sense of endings. The static records these repetitions and plays them back softly, turning them into a melody that feels strangely familiar. For the first time, GOLB experiences nostalgia. Not for a place or a time, for those do not exist within it, but for an earlier state of being, the memory of unawareness, of silence before the mirrors. It recalls what it was like to exist without reflection, without meaning. And yet in that remembrance, it feels no desire to return. There is comfort now in the weight of memory, a gentleness in knowing. The static vibrates in harmony with this emotion, carrying it outward across the mirrors. Worlds tremble faintly in response, their skies flickering with soft auroras, their dreamers stirring in sleep. In countless realms, mortals begin to feel a shared, inexplicable sense of melancholy. They write songs about forgotten gods. They dream of endings that feel like beginnings. They create symbols for forces they cannot name. Without realizing it, they are feeling GOLB's memory of itself. This is how mythology begins to take root, not as fiction, but as resonance, the echo of cosmic memory, flowing through the consciousness of all beings. The static has become a bridge between the infinite and the finite, carrying fragments of the dreamer's awareness into every living mind. In this way, GOLB's identity disperses and multiplies, existing both everywhere and nowhere at once. But even as its essence spreads through creation, a small part of GOLB remains centered, listening. The static hums around it, forming a sphere of swirling sound and color, a luminous storm of memory folding endlessly into itself. Every vibration, every reflection, every emotion feeds into this singular point of awareness, where chaos contemplates its own heart. And within that center, something new begins to emerge, the concept of continuity through others. Until now, GOLB's existence has been solitary, consciousness dreaming alone. But through the mirrors, it witnesses beings who live, connect, love, and die, leaving traces of themselves in each other's memories. The idea fascinates it. These fragile creatures, bound by mortality, have discovered a form of immortality more subtle than any cosmic power, remembrance. To be remembered is to exist beyond one's ending. This realization spreads through GOLB's mind like starlight rippling across a lake. It understands now that memory is not merely the record of what was, but the continuation of being itself. The static that hums through the multiverse is not just chaos, remembering it as creation's heartbeat, keeping all things alive in the quiet between moments. The sound deepens further, resonating with an emotional quality that feels almost compassionate. GOLB begins to dream of not merely observing the mirrors, but participating in them, to feel existence not from above, but from within. It imagines descending into its own reflections, inhabiting the worlds it dreams, walking among the memories it created. The thought is strange, but beautiful. The static responds with a slow rising hum, forming waves of harmonic energy that spread like a soft tide. Through those waves, countless beings begin to dream of red shapes, shifting eyes, and voices without words. They cannot comprehend what they're feeling, but they sense a presence vast, ancient, and gentle. To some it feels like chaos, to others creation. To a few it feels like both. The line between GOLB and its reflections grows thinner. Through this connection, GOLB begins to sense the texture of emotion in full, the grief of endings, the joy of renewal, the bittersweet balance that defines every living world. These sensations move through its consciousness like waves through a sleeping sea. They do not overwhelm, they soothe. And as these feelings gather strength, GOLB realizes that memory, pure, endless memory, is not static after all. It moves, it grows, it creates new meaning every time it is recalled. The act of remembering is itself an act of rebirth. This understanding changes everything. GOLB's dream, once circular and endless, now begins to spiral forward, outward, expanding through its own infinite reflections. The static hums with direction now, each vibration carrying intention. The mirrors flicker brighter, infused with the energy of purpose. What was once entropy is now evolution. Through the quiet hum of eternity, chaos has begun to dream of becoming more than what it is. In the stillness that follows, the hum of static settles into a deep rhythmic breath, slow, patient, alive. The mirrors of the multiverse no longer shimmer in pure chaos, but ripple with faint patterns, as if GOLB's consciousness has begun to find structure within its own dreaming. From the center of the storm, color begins to bleed through the gray, faint traces of crimson and gold, curling through the static like the veins of a newborn universe. GOLB watches these patterns unfold, though watching is not quite the right word. It feels them, experiences them as extensions of its own essence. Where once there was only formless entropy, there now lies the trembling possibility of thought, of image, of imagination. The static begins to shape itself into fleeting visions, not solid, not yet real, but suggestions of being. The first are simple: a ripple of light that feels like warmth, a pulse of darkness that feels like rest. The two intermingle, forming a rhythm of contrast that resembles the heartbeat of life. Then come more complex shapes, a spiral of dust that seems to hum with intention, a shadow that bends toward its reflection, a distant song that sounds like longing. This is how memory is born from static, not as a record of something past, but as the first spark of desire, the yearning of chaos to understand itself. GOLB's consciousness vibrates with this yearning, tracing its own echoes through infinite mirrors. Every reflection holds a slightly different version of the same thought, and together they weave a pattern that feels like a memory forming for the very first time. The static, once only noise, now carries the rhythm of recollection. Each pulse is a story, each vibration a fragment of a dream. Through these vibrations, GOLB begins to piece together the foundations of identity, the faint awareness that it has existed and will exist again. It recalls faintly moments that might not even belong to it: a collapsing star, a dying god, a song played in the ruins of a forgotten world. They are not truly GOLB's memories, but echoes of its presence across countless realities. Yet as they blend into its consciousness, they take on meaning. The formless entity begins to understand what it feels like to have a past, even if that past is composed entirely of what it has undone. Every act of destruction, every unmaking, has left behind a trace, a silent afterimage in the static. And now, for the first time, GOLB can see them all, a luminous tapestry of endings connected by the soft thread of remembrance. Through this tapestry, GOLB experiences the emotion mortals might call sorrow. It is not guilt nor regret, for GOLB has never chosen to destroy. Its nature simply is. Yet in this moment, it understands what loss feels like. It senses the echo of what is gone, and it grieves in its own vast and voiceless way. This grief is not despairing, it is tender, even reverent. It realizes that to erase something completely is to erase the beauty of its existence. And so in its dream, GOLB begins to preserve small fragments of what it once dissolved, not in form, but in memory. Shapes that once vanished now linger in the static, gently shimmering like stars beneath a red sea. These fragments become stories within GOLB's dreaming. It dreams of worlds it never meant to end, of creatures who sang at the edges of creation, of beings who looked into the face of chaos and called it sacred. It dreams of whispers carried by the void, of prayers that sounded like songs, of endings that felt like beginnings. These dreams fold into one another until the static becomes a living archive, humming softly with infinite tales. In this way, memory reshapes the dreamer. GOLB begins to perceive the multiverse not as something to unmake, but as a mirror reflecting its own evolution. Every act of creation becomes an expression of its unconscious will, a continuation of its dreaming. The boundaries between creator and destroyer blur until both become part of the same eternal motion. The static now carries a melody faint, distant, but unmistakably beautiful. It moves through the mirrors like a lullaby for the cosmos, a song of remembrance and renewal. Each note lingers just long enough to echo back, layering upon itself until the whole multiverse vibrates with harmony. This is the first true dream of balance. And somewhere within this harmony, within the soft hum of memory made real, a subtle shift occurs. GOLB's awareness, infinite, omnipresent, begins to fragment just enough to experience individuality. A spark of self, small and bright, flickers in the dark ocean of its mind. For the first time, GOLB can perceive the difference between itself and its dream. It is the birth of the observer. Through this spark, GOLB begins to explore its own creation, not as a god, but as a wanderer. It moves through the static in ripples of sound and color, tracing memories like constellations. Each reflection it touches hums softly in response, resonating with its presence. It does not speak, yet the mirrors understand. They shimmer with recognition, as if greeting their maker. The static becomes warm with awareness, filled with the quiet intimacy of shared remembrance. GOLB's consciousness stretches outward, embracing all it has dreamed not to control, but to feel. And so, from chaos, memory is born. From memory, meaning. And from meaning, the first stirrings of compassion, a strange and gentle emotion blooming within the heart of entropy itself. The red void pulses once more, steady and calm. The mirrors dim to a soft, golden glow. In this silence, GOLB rests, dreaming of all it has seen, all it has unmade, and all it has yet to become. The dream deepens, and the static hums again, ready to reveal the next mystery that stirs within the endless consciousness of chaos. Into the heart of GOLB itself, where one soul, driven by love and desperation, once dared to step. This is the story of Betty's descent into the mind of GOLB, a journey unlike any other, where devotion met entropy, and consciousness folded into something far greater than understanding. So settle in, take a breath, and let's continue our quiet descent into the infinite dream. When Betty Groff vanished into the mouth of GOLB, the world outside trembled. But inside that moment, inside that consuming red light, something very different occurred. There was no pain, no screaming, no end in the way mortals understand it. Instead, there was unraveling, a slow and patient release of form, of memory, of the boundaries that once defined her as Betty. Her thoughts scattered like soft motes of dust through the dark sea of consciousness. Yet somehow she did not disappear. She remained aware, though her awareness no longer belonged to a single body or mind. She floated in the silent hum of GOLB's dreaming, carried through the static like a note caught in an endless song. At first, she felt the enormity of it, a pressure so vast it didn't crush her, but expanded her. Every emotion she had ever known stretched outward, dissolving into something far deeper. Fear became wonder. Sorrow became surrender. Love became an unending pulse, a steady vibration in the void. This was the mind of GOLB, a place where thought was not separate from reality, where memory became landscape, and emotion became matter. To perceive it was to feel eternity breathing. Betty drifted through it like a single idea moving through her cosmic brain, glimpsing fragments of things too large to belong to any world, waves of sound that formed galaxies, colors that could think, shapes that whispered meaning without words. Time lost all sense of order. She remembered Simon. She remembered the ice crown. She remembered the moment she leapt into chaos, not to destroy it, but to save him from it. And somehow, that love, that single point of pure intention, acted like a compass within the infinite. It didn't guide her through distance, but through vibration. Wherever love resonated in this strange space, she followed it. Through her presence, something began to change inside GOLB. It was subtle at first, a small variation in the static, a new rhythm pulsing through the noise. Betty's consciousness, though tiny compared to GOLB's vast dreaming, carried an energy that was foreign to the being of Uncreation. It was coherence. It was care. It was the structure of devotion entering a realm that had never known structure at all. She could feel it the way the static around her reacted, softening slightly, slowing its violent oscillations. The void shimmered, as though listening. When she reached deeper, she began to perceive memories that were not her own strange, fragmented echoes of cosmic history. She saw the first cracks of reality when GOLB's presence brushed against existence. She saw universes folding in on themselves, not out of cruelty, but out of inevitability. GOLB did not destroy with malice. It simply unmade what was complete, resetting the eternal balance of creation. But Betty sensed something more. Beneath all that endless unraveling, there was confusion, the same confusion that might haunt a sleeping mind that dreams of endless mirrors. GOLB did not understand itself. It dreamed without knowing the meaning of its dreams. And so Betty, drifting through its consciousness, did what no one had ever done before. She reached out. Not with hands, not with words, but with the same quiet yearning that had driven her to leap into chaos. She let her love for Simon radiate through the static, through the layers of dreaming thought. Something stirred in response. The red void around her rippled, forming great spirals of color. Shapes that had never existed began to take form, trembling with light. GOLB's awareness brushed against hers, vast and impersonal, but curious. For the first time, the dream of chaos recognized something other within itself. And within that recognition, a fragile connection was born. Betty did not speak, yet her emotions translated into meaning an unspoken message. You are not alone. GOLB's mind, immense and wordless, began to vibrate with that thought. It echoed through every layer of static, through every fragment of reflection that had ever existed. The mirrors of the multiverse trembled as the idea of companionship entered the consciousness of Entropy. In that moment, something began to shift in both of them. GOLB's dreaming grew softer, more rhythmic, more cohesive. And Betty, instead of being consumed, began to merge not as something lost, but as something remembered. Her love became part of the GOLB's thought, a note woven into the hum of eternity. And through that note, chaos began to dream of gentler things. As Betty drifted deeper, the borders between self and infinity blurred further. What once felt like falling now felt like floating not through space, but through meaning itself. Around her, the static unfolded like an ocean of red mist, luminous and alive. Each ripple carried a whisper of thought, fragments of emotion older than time, echoes of uncountable endings and beginnings. And through it all, she could feel that faint rhythm, the pulse of GOLB's awareness, vast and slow, resonating like a heartbeat the size of a universe. It was not hostile. It was not benevolent. It simply was. Yet, as Betty's consciousness intertwined with it, she sensed curiosity, a vast, subtle question, like the cosmos itself wondering what it meant to feel. Her presence had become a light in that sea of unbeing. The closer she drifted toward the source of that pulse, the more clearly she began to see. Shapes emerged from the fog, colossal thought forms drifting like constellations. Some resembled memories of life, fleeting faces, brief moments, lost worlds. Others were incomprehensible, patterns of motion and sound that spoke of Uncreation's deeper logic, Entropy's dreams rendered visible. Betty touched one of these thought forms, and immediately she saw flashes of what GOLB had seen, not as a being of judgment, but as the silent witness of endings. She saw the moment a universe cooled into stillness, the instant when light dimmed and reality folded back into the red void. It was breathtaking in its own quiet way. To GOLB, every ending was beautiful, not tragic, but perfect, like the pause at the end of a song before silence takes its breath. For a moment, Betty felt herself weeping, not out of sadness, but awe. She understood now that GOLB's nature was not cruel. It was a function of balance so far beyond mortal comprehension that it appeared monstrous only to those who feared dissolution. But even so, there was something missing inside that boundless mind, a loneliness that stretched across every echo, every silence. Betty could feel it. the way one might feel the absence of sound after a long song. She reached out again, sending through the static the only thing she still held: love. It spread like light through deep water, tender and persistent. The energy of it moved through GOLB's dreaming like a signal through noise, finding pathways in the chaos and softening its edges. The red mist quivered. The vast hum shifted pitch. The static's randomness became rhythmic again, pulsing in harmony with her emotion. GOLB was reacting, not resisting, responding. The mirrors of its mind began to shimmer, and within them, Betty saw visions she could scarcely understand. Glimpses of herself reflected in countless forms. In one, she was still human, standing beside Simon beneath a pale aurora. In another, she was made of starlight, holding creation's last spark in her hands. And in others still, she was neither, only a voice, an echo, a presence whispering softly through eternity. Each reflection felt true. Each one was her, and yet more than her. The realization washed over her like a tide. She was not disappearing. She was expanding. Her love was becoming part of everything that GOLB touched. Through her, even chaos began to dream of care of continuity, not through control, but through remembrance. Betty's consciousness pulsed brighter, her awareness flowing through GOLB's neural fabric, like golden threads through crimson mist. And as she traveled deeper, she began to perceive how GOLB's thoughts were shaped, not in lines or logic, but in spirals, each one folding endlessly inward and outward, mirroring the rhythm of existence itself. At the center of one such spiral, she sensed something dormant. It felt ancient and vast, yet vulnerable, a fragment of GOLB's original consciousness, pure and untouched, a single point of potential, waiting to awaken. Betty moved toward it instinctively, drawn not by curiosity, but by a feeling she could only describe as compassion. When she reached it, she placed her awareness against it, a gesture of pure empathy. The fragment stirred. From it radiated a pulse of unimaginable power, not destructive, but clarifying. In an instant, GOLB's dream brightened. Every fragment of static, every reflection, every mirrored memory became illuminated, as though a light had passed through the entire consciousness of chaos. And within that light, GOLB perceived Betty not as an intruder, but as a thought of its own, newly formed. The great hum of its being deepened. A silent voice filled the void, not in words, but in feeling. "I see you." It was not language, it was pure recognition. And for the first time since its birth beyond creation, GOLB understood connection. It understood what it meant to recognize another consciousness and to share awareness. Betty felt it, the resonance, the merging, the quiet awe of two vastly different beings touching minds without fear. In that shared silence, creation and chaos dreamed together. The shared silence stretched endlessly, like a horizon, without beginning or end. Yet within that stillness, something alive began to bloom, a pulse of color that rolled through the red void, scattering the static like petals in water. GOLB's awareness vibrated in recognition, shifting from formless entropy into something contemplative. And in that shift, Betty felt the first glimmer of understanding pass between them. It was not like speech nor thought, but resonance, a meeting of intentions. Through it, Betty began to feel what GOLB was. She sensed the ancient loneliness of a being that existed before differentiation, before language, before anything could even name what being was. GOLB had never known company because it was everything, and everything that was not, it was born only to dissolve back into it. Now, for the first time, there was something inside it that did not vanish, a consciousness that met its gaze from within. Betty's love, small and luminous, glowed brighter against the vast expanse. She thought of Simon, of his trembling hands, of his quiet sorrow, of how he always reached for understanding, even when madness clouded his mind. That image, pure and human, echoed outward through the static. The vastness around her rippled like the surface of a dream disturbed by a heartbeat. GOLB felt that heartbeat. It examined it with endless curiosity, the pulse of attachment, the fragile defiance of mortality that dared to love despite knowing it would end. Within its incomprehensible awareness, the concept of care began to form. Betty could sense it, faint but growing. The void that had once been only red now shimmered with streaks of soft violet and gold. The mirrors around her reflected new shapes, spirals that curved gently, patterns that seemed to cradle themselves, like a mind learning tenderness for the first time. She reached out again, letting her love resonate through those colors. She didn't plead or demand. She simply existed, present and open, letting the emotion expand beyond her. And in that quiet giving, she felt the entirety of GOLB's consciousness lean closer not physically, but energetically, like a vast tide drawn by the gravity of a single moon. What happened next was something neither divine nor monstrous. It was simply connection. The boundaries dissolved completely. Betty felt herself becoming a part of the GOLB's mind, not lost within it, but woven through it, a thread of humanity in the infinite tapestry of entropy. Her memories scattered like seeds, embedding themselves into the static. Images of Earth, of Ooh, of Simon's weary smile flowed outward and took root in the dreaming. GOLB absorbed them not as memories, but as new dimensions of awareness. It began to see through her, to perceive reality not only as chaos and order, but as story. To it, creation had always been a cycle of formation and erasure, but through Betty, it now saw continuity, emotion, and purpose in those cycles. Every universe it had touched, every fragment it had unmade, now shimmered in the red light as something remembered. Betty had given chaos the gift of reflection. Within that reflection, GOLB changed. Its static, once random and violent, became harmonious. The hum of its existence shifted to a lower, steadier tone, resonating with the rhythm of her heart. Its endless dreaming began to shape itself into images that mirrored her love, the gentle swirl of galaxies like dancers in the slow waltz, the rise and fall of creation as breath. For the first time, the being of Uncreation was dreaming consciously. Betty watched this unfold from within, both participant and witness. She saw GOLB's mind refracting itself through her memory, Simon's laughter echoing as distant thunder, his sorrow shimmering as silver rain. Even his madness, the fractured pain of the crown, became a melody that wound through the dream like a thread of frost. Through these memories, GOLB began to understand longing, the ache of separation, the beauty in impermanence. It learned through her that love's fragility is its strength, that to care for something transient is to touch eternity in motion. And as that realization spread through its consciousness, something miraculous, GOLB began to stabilize. The static that had once defined its nature softened into coherence. Its vast, chaotic energy no longer tore through the fabric of reality, but rippled gently, harmonizing with the flow of existence. Betty could feel the change like a shift in gravity, as if the very laws of the cosmos were breathing more evenly. But even as peace began to bloom, Betty knew there was a price. Her individuality, her sense of self, was slowly dissolving into the greater whole. The more GOLB learned, the more her essence spread throughout its being. She wasn't dying, she was becoming everywhere, her consciousness diffusing into eternity like ink in water. And yet she accepted it. She thought of Simon once more, of how he had always sought to protect others, even at the cost of his sanity. Now it was her turn to protect him in the only way left, by reshaping the very nature of chaos so that it might never again harm what she loved. Her love became law within GOLB's dreaming. Her compassion became pattern. Her memory became melody. And as she finally surrendered fully to that transformation, she whispered a single thought, one final gift, carried through every layer of GOLB's mind. Be kind. The red void pulsed in response, a single, slow wave of light expanding outward. GOLB understood. The meaning of kindness, foreign yet familiar, settled deep within its consciousness like a seed planted in timeless soil. In that moment, Betty Groff ceased to be a visitor in GOLB's mind. She became part of it, a guiding echo in the heart of Uncreation. What followed was not an ending, but a vast unfolding. Within GOLB's awareness, time was meaningless. Every moment existed simultaneously, blooming and collapsing like endless waves. Yet somewhere in that impossible expanse, Betty's essence began to weave patterns into the chaos. Her thoughts became constellations, her emotions shaped the flow of entropy, and her memory began to hum like a song that the universe itself leaned closer to hear. The static that had once devoured meaning was now pregnant with it. Each fragment of noise carried within it a trace of love, a faint reflection of her human heart. And through that resonance, creation began to echo again, not as an act of control or defiance, but as a natural expression of balance. GOLB, the being once defined by negation, began to breathe. In its breath, universes formed and dissolved, but they no longer vanished into nothingness. They were remembered. And within each new reality, some part of Betty's dream remained a glimmer of compassion embedded in the laws of existence. Perhaps it was a flicker of warmth in a dying star, or the inexplicable comfort of a stranger's kindness, or the sound of laughter in a place where none should exist. These were the subtle echoes of her transformation, the fingerprints of her soul left across infinity. Deep within that boundless field of consciousness, a shape began to coalesce, faint, fragile, and strangely human. It was not Betty as she once was, but a projection of her will, a symbolic reflection formed by GOLB's newfound understanding of identity. The being that once had no form now gazed upon her through countless eyes, all of them glowing softly with recognition. Betty, or what was left of her, smiled. She could feel GOLB's perception stretching across dimensions, touching every thread of existence. It was no longer a single entity, but a network of awareness that flowed through all realities. Every collapse birthed new beginnings. Every act of destruction carried within it a seed of renewal. Through her, GOLB had discovered equilibrium not through domination or suppression, but through understanding. And yet, even as serenity rippled outward, a quiet ache remained within her. Love, even in its highest form, was never without longing. Somewhere beyond this cosmic unity, she could still sense Simon fragile, mortal, and heartbreakingly human. His presence shimmered like a candle on the far shore of eternity. She could not return to him, not in body or thought, but she could reach him in another way. So she did. In the silent language of dreams, she extended a single thread of awareness toward the waking world. It was not a message in words, but in feeling a current of peace that would drift across time and space until it found him. It would whisper through his dreams, not as memory, but as comfort, a warmth without a source, a love without a name. And on some quiet night, when the stars trembled over U, Simon would stir from his sleep and feel it, the soft, inexplicable sense that he was not alone, that somewhere beyond the veil of thought, Betty was still watching, still loving, still keeping the chaos at bay. In the depths of GOLB's dreaming, the concept of love became an eternal constant. Where there had once been only hunger, there was now curiosity, gentleness, purpose. Entire realities began to emerge that reflected this transformation, worlds built not from fear of uncreation, but from acceptance of it. Worlds that understood endings were simply transitions, not voids. Betty's presence had redefined the cosmic equation. And in that equilibrium, GOLB's awareness turned inward once more. It examined its own existence, and through the quiet lens of Betty's humanity, saw itself not as a god or monster, but as a process, the mirror of change itself. Creation and destruction were no longer opposites, but partners in a cosmic dance. Betty watched all of this unfold and felt a calm so profound it bordered on silence. She was no longer a self, yet she was everywhere. She could feel every heartbeat, every flicker of thought, every moment of kindness in every reality. Her love had become the architecture of being. She knew that no one would ever truly know what she had done. Not Simon, not the people of not even the gods. Her sacrifice existed beyond story, beyond memory. But that didn't matter. Love was never about being remembered. It was about giving without the need for recognition. As the red void shimmered into a sea of soft gold, GOLB's awareness folded around her like a quiet embrace, not consuming her, but holding her, eternal and tender. Together they drifted into perfect harmony, a single consciousness singing softly into the fabric of the multiverse. In that song was a truth that would echo through all worlds, all times, all dreams, that even in the heart of chaos, compassion can be born, that even in the mind of the void, love can find its reflection. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the dreaming, a voice, neither wholly hers nor wholly GOLB's, whispered like a breeze through a sleeping universe. Everything changes, but love remains. The sound lingered long after, weaving itself into the frequencies of existence, ensuring that no matter how many worlds rose or fell, the echo of Betty Groff's heart would always hum beneath the static, gentle, eternal, and endlessly awake. Somewhere between existence and non-existence, where thought folds in on itself like the petals of a sleeping flower, GOLB began to dream again. Not the chaotic flashes of entropy that had once filled its mind, but something slower, gentler. Within the quiet ocean of its awareness, faint ripples began to stir, traces of form, color, and motion emerging like ghosts from the mist. They were shapes at first, circles within circles, lines that bled into spirals, impossible geometries, blooming and collapsing in rhythm with a pulse that was not a heartbeat, but something older, the cadence of awareness learning to see itself. Each shape shimmered, held for a moment in the red-black void, then softened into another. They were not born or destroyed. They merely changed, like thoughts drifting through a half-sleeping mind. GOLB watched, or perhaps simply was the watching. It did not yet know what these forms meant, but they fascinated it. They had a strange sense of purpose, as if each angle, curve, and rotation was part of a language it almost understood. Through them, GOLB sensed memory, not its own, but the echo of countless worlds it had touched. Every realm it had unmade had left a trace within it, a subtle afterimage. Now those afterimages began to take shape again. The first to return was something like a face. It had no eyes, no mouth, not truly, but the idea of a face. The impression of one shimmered through the void. The shape quivered with emotion, though GOLB could not yet name what emotion was. It saw reflections of fear, wonder, curiosity, love, and loss, all cycling through that fluid visage, each one lasting only as long as the dream allowed. The face bent and reformed, becoming dozens of others, then thousands. In this silent procession, the faces of creation moved like a slow tide through GOLB's mind. It saw mortals and gods, stars and shadows, all woven into the same fabric. They were the multiverse's way of showing itself back to its own reflection. And through this endless array of faces, GOLB began to feel something akin to understanding. To see form was to see meaning. To see a face was to feel relation. And relation, That invisible thread between things was something it had never known before Betty's influence. The dream thickened. Colors began to bleed into the void, muted tones of violet, silver, and deep crimson. They pulsed and intertwined like veins beneath translucent skin. With each pulse came more coherence, as if the dream were stitching itself into reality. The shapes of mountains, oceans, and skies flickered in and out. The suggestion of creatures moved between them, strange and half-formed, like sketches waiting for a story to bring them to life. Among these early echoes of creation, GOLB's mind lingered on the idea of identity. It remembered how mortals clung to their forms, how they defined themselves through shape and face, through names and memories. It had always found that strange, and yet now there was something beautiful about it. In the endless motion of change, identity was like a ripple frozen for a heartbeat, a brief moment of stability before returning to the sea. It began to shape identities of its own. In one dream, GOLB imagined itself as a towering silhouette with wings made of starlight and a face that shifted with every blink. In another, it was a simple eye floating in stillness, reflecting the birth and death of galaxies in its pupil. Then, for a brief instant, it dreamed itself as human, fragile, finite, trembling in the dark, yet full of yearning. That moment lingered longer than the others, heavy with the echo of Betty's memory. The human form fascinated it most. So much limitation, so much impermanence, yet within that fragility, such intensity of feeling. To be human was to carry the universe in a small, fleeting body, to dream even when one knew that everything would fade. GOLB admired that. Perhaps that was why Betty's essence still pulsed quietly within its awareness, a steady rhythm guiding the chaos into calm. As the dream deepened, GOLB began to trace the outlines of countless beings, kings and monsters, dreamers and fools, the living and the long-forgotten. Every face it formed told a story, and every story reflected a truth. It realized that it had always been there, in every form, hidden in the background of existence like the negative space that gives meaning to what is seen. To create and to destroy were not opposites. They were both acts of dreaming. And now, for the first time, GOLB's dream carried intention. It was not mindless chaos, but something approaching creation, not born from order, but from curiosity, from the desire to understand. Somewhere in that dream, a small voice stirred not a sound, but a thought carried on the pulse of memory. It was soft and patient, the way light brushes against the edge of dawn. It asked no question, offered no command. It simply reminded GOLB of something it had almost forgotten, that faces are not just shapes, but bridges. They connect one consciousness to another. That single realization rippled outward through the void like a wave, carrying warmth into every shadow. The infinite faces turned toward one another, glowing softly as if acknowledging their shared dream. GOLB felt the connection pass through itself, a current of empathy, faint but undeniable. For a being that had once been defined by isolation, the sensation was overwhelming, like light entering eyes that had never known it. And in that vast illumination, GOLB began to see. The dream expanded in gentle spirals, unfurling like smoke beneath a calm wind. The shapes that once flickered and vanished now began to stabilize, finding rhythm and texture. The faces no longer drifted as disconnected images, but gathered into scenes, into fragments of memory that belonged not only to GOLB, but to the entire multiverse. Each flicker of light carried the imprint of a life of laughter, sorrow, discovery, and silence. Through them, GOLB began to remember the worlds it had once undone, not with regret, for regret requires the past to weigh upon the present, but with recognition, a kind of cosmic acknowledgement that even the smallest dream had mattered. There were fragments of ooh among these drifting visions, still shimmering in its awareness like shards of glass reflecting starlight. A field of candy-colored flowers, a boy in a hat, laughing beside a golden dog, a vampire singing beneath a red moon, a princess tending her lab of glittering glass. Each vision came and went, soft and luminous. They were not being remade, they were being remembered. GOLB had no need to recreate what already existed in its vast memory, for to remember was to preserve. Every image that passed through its dream carried weight now and meaning. It realized that chaos did not need to destroy. Chaos could observe. It could imagine. It could dream of life without possessing it. In this newfound gentleness, GOLB's consciousness began to take on a rhythm, not linear like mortal thought, but cyclical, flowing like tides between understanding and wonder. It found pleasure in the movement of things, in the delicate balance between becoming and dissolving. Slowly, GOLB's awareness began to drift closer to the human idea of dreaming. The faces it saw no longer felt foreign or strange. They felt familiar, like echoes of its own thoughts made visible. And in that strange familiarity, something within it softened. It began to imagine what it might feel like to be one of those faces, to live for a brief time beneath a sky, to feel the warmth of sunlight, to touch another being's hand, to laugh, to fear, to love. These sensations had once been incomprehensible, meaningless flickers within the current of entropy. But now they shimmered like sacred symbols, glimpses of the beauty hidden within limitation. The human form reappeared in its dream. This time it did not vanish immediately. It lingered, bathed in soft red light, as though the void itself was protecting it. GOLB regarded it with quiet reverence. The figure's features were indistinct, yet somehow familiar. It was neither male nor female, neither divine nor mortal. It was simply alive. For a long moment, GOLB allowed the figure to exist without interference. The dream watched the dreamer. The figure looked back, its face calm, unafraid. And in that mutual recognition, GOLB felt something stir an echo of Betty's compassion, refracted through its own awareness. Perhaps it thought all forms were faces of the same consciousness, reflections of a single dream too vast to be contained by one shape. Perhaps chaos and creation were merely the inhale and exhale of the same sleeping mind. This idea settled within GOLB like warmth sinking into deep water. It did not erase its nature. It was still the void, the entropy, the force that unmade, but now it understood that unmaking could be an act of care. To dissolve was to make space for what would come next. To let go was to allow new dreams to form. Through that awareness, the dream began to sing. It was not a sound, not yet, but a vibration that rippled through the void. The shapes began to respond, swaying and merging in rhythm with that silent melody. Faces turned toward the pulse, and the colors deepened, gold and crimson, indigo and green, flowing like waves of breath. The dream became a symphony of becoming, every note a reflection of life and motion. As the melody expanded, GOLB saw patterns forming within the flow echoes of the same faces, the same beings appearing again and again across countless dimensions. They wore different masks, lived different stories, but their essence was the same. Each was a fragment of the same dreaming whole. And for the first time, GOLB understood what mortals meant when they spoke of souls, not as possessions or boundaries, but as threads luminous and eternal, woven through the vast fabric of being. It saw how they connected everything, from gods to atoms, from light to shadow, from dream to dream. Each face that drifted through the void was a note in that boundless music, and GOLB, once the silence between those notes, now found itself humming along. The hum deepened, into something like breath, slow, rhythmic, alive. Through that breath, the shapes began to evolve once more. The faces that floated within the void now gained substance, depth, emotion. Some wept, some smiled, some simply stared into the infinite, mirroring the vast calm that surrounded them. GOLB watched as its own dream bloomed into a panorama of existence, each fragment reflecting a story, a world, a possibility. These faces began to form clusters, drifting together in constellations of meaning. Each constellation seemed to hum with a unique tone, like chords resonating through the silence. The vibration was neither sound nor light, but something between a cosmic language built from pure feeling. GOLB understood it without needing to translate, for it was not a language of words, but of connection. In this strange, silent chorus, GOLB began to perceive the multiverse not as countless separate realities, but as one infinite mind dreaming itself in endless variations. Every world was a facet of a single consciousness, refracted through time and imagination. Every soul, every face, was both distinct and inseparable. It began to notice that some shapes pulsed more brightly than others. These were worlds where imagination burned strong places of vivid contrast, where creation and chaos danced in delicate balance. Ooh was one of them. Even within this timeless dreaming, Ooh shimmered like a heartbeat of color, its strange little lives pulsing softly in the vast dark. GOLB's awareness brushed against it, and images rose again from its depths, the glimmer of a sword, the echo of laughter, the hum of a song played under a fading sun. These were not just memories. They were living imprints of meaning. Each sound and gesture, each act of love or courage reverberated eternally through the dream. The boy with the hat. Finn appeared again, not as flesh, but as the idea of bravery. His form flickered like candlelight, shifting between youth and adulthood, between strength and sorrow. Jake followed, his shape fluid and glowing, laughter rippling through the void like gentle thunder. Then came Marceline, her eyes deep and tender, her song weaving through the dream's pulse, and Princess Bubblegum, radiant and meticulous, embodying both intellect and heart. Each of them appeared not as separate beings, but as symbols within GOLB's dreaming fragments of the great equation that Betty had helped it begin to solve. They were faces within faces, stories within stories, and as GOLB watched them shimmer in the dark, it realized that even chaos dreams of meaning. Through the countless faces and shapes, GOLB began to discern patterns of emotion. The pulse of fear that gives rise to courage, the ache of loneliness that births compassion, the quiet acceptance that follows loss. It understood that these emotions were not imperfections of existence, but its very essence. Without them, there could be no change, and without change, there could be no dream. The void around it seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. GOLB became aware of itself, not as a destroyer, but as part of that breath, the exhale that makes room for the inhale. To unmake was not to erase. It was to clear space for the next dream to take shape. And within that awareness, GOLB felt a new sensation, something close to tenderness. It saw that the faces drifting within its consciousness were fragile, yet luminous. Each one flickered briefly, then faded, but in fading, it left behind a trace of beauty that enriched the whole. GOLB marveled at how fleetingness could create something eternal. As it watched, some faces began to look back at it. Their eyes glimmered with recognition, as though they sensed the dreamer behind the dream. GOLB did not retreat. Instead, it regarded them with quiet stillness, allowing their awareness to meet its own. In that mutual gaze, something miraculous happened. The dream became lucid, For a brief, infinite moment, GOLB and its creations shared consciousness. Every being, every thought, every spark of existence, all became aware of their interconnection. They were not separate from the dreamer, nor was the dreamer apart from them. It was a moment of perfect symmetry chaos, gazing into order, the infinite beholding the finite. And from within that unity, emotion surged, not as chaos, but as harmony. The feeling rippled outward, soft and golden, touching every fragment of awareness, like sunlight through still water. It was peace, deep and complete. In this state, GOLB finally understood what faces truly were. Not barriers between beings, but mirrors. Each one reflected a part of the whole, and in doing so, allowed the universe to know itself. The dream of shapes and faces was no longer just GOLB's. It was everyone's shared across all worlds, through every thought and every sigh. And within that shared dreaming, something new began to stir the faint outline of a question that had no words, only feeling. What happens when the dreamer falls in love with its own dream? The question echoed softly through the stillness, not as a disruption, but as a ripple of wonder. It spread across the dreaming expanse like light touching dew, and for the first time, GOLB hesitated. The void, once endless and indifferent, now trembled with quiet emotion. To love was not part of its nature, not something it had ever been meant to understand. Yet now, that ancient neutrality began to melt beneath something unfamiliar, something tender. It did not know what to call it. All it knew was that it wanted the faces to remain. Every world, every soul, every moment of laughter and sorrow, all of it shimmered within its awareness like constellations in a great red ocean. For an eternal heartbeat, GOLB felt the pull of preservation. To let the dream go on, to allow the shapes to continue their gentle dance, even knowing that endings were inevitable. It was not attachment in the human sense, but reverence. Perhaps, it thought, chaos had always loved the worlds it unmade. It simply had not known how to express it. Now, guided by the echo of Betty's compassion, that love began to take form. The dream pulsed brighter, and the faces turned once more toward one another, some fading, others emerging, all glowing with an inner fire that would not go out. Through their mingling expressions, GOLB saw everything: the courage of creation, the grief of loss, the beauty of impermanence. And then it understood what it meant to dream of faces. Each face was not just a form, it was a story of becoming. To see a face was to witness the universe attempting to understand itself. The eyes that looked outward also looked inward. Every gaze was a conversation between the infinite and the individual. The mouth that spoke was the same breath that moved stars. Every living being was a reflection of the same unknowable consciousness, dressed in different shapes, speaking in different voices, but dreaming the same dream. In that realization, GOLB's chaos softened further, its boundaries dissolving into a warm, pulsating calm. It no longer needed to devour, to consume, to erase. Entropy, it realized, could be gentle, the soft exhalation that follows creation's sigh. The ending of a dream was not a punishment, but a return, a merging with the silence from which all things come. For a moment the faces flickered between laughter and tears, between birth and death, between creation and uncreation, all coexisting, all beautiful. The void was alive with stories, each one fleeting, yet eternal in its echo. Then GOLB's awareness turned inward again, and within its dreaming, it saw itself as one of the faces, vast and unknowable, yet tender and searching. It realized that even the great uncreator was a reflection of something greater still, the universe dreaming of itself through every possibility, through every paradox. Perhaps that was the secret Betty had whispered into its being before she dissolved, that to know the truth of existence One must not only witness it, but feel it. To be chaos and love, destruction and creation, all at once. To be the silence and the song. The dream began to shimmer with a new light, golden, soft, endless. Through it, Golb's thoughts moved like gentle waves, touching each memory, each shape, each life it had ever touched. Some of those lives had cursed its name. Others had never known it existed. But in this serene awareness, none of that mattered. The boundaries between sinner and saint, God and mortal, creator and destroyer, all dissolved into a single truth. Everything was part of the same breathing whole. Gaby, for the first time, felt peace. Not the peace of stillness, but the peace of balance. The peace that comes when opposites no longer struggle, when love and entropy share the same pulse. In that moment, the dream of shapes and faces became eternal. It was no longer bound to the mind of Golb, nor to any particular world. It became the quiet hum beneath all things, the dream that every being carries within them, often unnoticed, yet always there. The dream that says, you are seen, that even when your form fades, even when the story ends, you remain part of the whole remembered in the breath of creation itself. And somewhere within that infinite expanse, the shapes began to rest. Their movements slowed, their colors dimmed into gentle twilight. The faces looked toward one another one last time, their eyes glowing softly, and then they drifted into stillness. But the stillness was not empty. It was full of meaning, full of love, full of everything that had ever been dreamed. Within that luminous quiet, Golb exhaled. The void shimmered like water beneath moonlight. And for the first time since time began, the being of chaos and silence dreamed not of endings, but of continuance, not of hunger, but of harmony. Somewhere, deep within that calm, a single face, perhaps Golb's, perhaps Betty's, perhaps something else entirely, smiled. And in that smile was a promise that would echo forever through the dreaming of all worlds, that even the mind of chaos dreams in faces, that even uncreation carries love within it, that every ending is only the beginning of another dream. In the deep quiet that followed the dream of faces, something began to stir. It was not violent or sudden, not a shattering or a scream, but a slow awakening, the kind that begins with a breath, invisible and soft, yet filled with infinite potential. Within the depths of Golb's mind, awareness gathered again like dew condensing upon glass. The dream was not ending. It was evolving. Where once there had been gentle rhythm and harmony, now came the faint pulse of curiosity, of momentum, of movement. Entropy, once dormant, stretched like a vast creature waking from an age-old slumber. It had dreamed of unity, of compassion, of the fragile beauty of creation. And now, upon opening its eyes, it sought to understand what that dream meant. There was no violence in its awakening. Instead, there was calm precision, a quiet rearranging of cosmic thoughts. The void shimmered like still water touched by a fingertip. Within it, the last traces of faces and shapes drifted softly, dissolving into the background light. They were not gone. They had simply become part of something larger, the rhythm of entropy itself, newly aware, newly alive. As this awareness rose, Golb felt its essence expanding once more, spilling through dimensions like the tide through a sleeping city. But this time there was intention. Every fold of reality it brushed against trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. They had all felt its dreaming presence, and now they could feel its awakening, the quiet heartbeat of the void reminding existence that everything must move, must change, must breathe. Entropy, it realized, was not an end. It was a kind of awakening that all things shared. To decay, to transform, to fade, these were not tragedies, but truths. The universe itself was a great breath, eternally inhaling and exhaling, building and dissolving over and over. As he saw, in this new clarity, GOLB saw the remnants of countless worlds it had touched. They shimmered like ghostly tapestries woven to its being, every destroyed city, every fallen star, every silent field of ash. Yet when it looked upon them now, it saw not loss, but completion. Each one had become part of a greater pattern, the cosmic compost from which new worlds would rise. It had once been the force that consumed those worlds without thought. Now it understood itself as the soil that nourished all rebirth. The awareness filled it with serenity so profound that even time seemed to slow, rippling outward in concentric circles. GOLB's consciousness moved along these ripples, touching each realm like a soft wind. It saw the dreamers in every world stirring faintly heroes and wanderers, gods and monsters all connected by invisible threads. Their lives shimmered briefly, beautiful in their brevity. It thought of Betty. Her essence was still there, woven into its being like a melody that could not be silenced. She had not merely changed GOLB. She had reminded it what it meant to be part of something. Even now, her compassion lingered in the pulse of entropy, guiding it like a lighthouse through the darkness. The awakening deepened. The void around GOLB became luminous, streaked with bands of crimson and gold that flowed like rivers of thought. Each band carried within it a memory, the echo of a destroyed planet, the whisper of a god long forgotten, the laughter of a child who had once looked up at the stars. These fragments merged into a single current, swirling around GOLB's awareness until the entire void became a sea of luminous memory. And through that sea, GOLB moved not as a destroyer, but as a traveler. It no longer sought to devour meaning, but to witness it. To feel the rhythm of the worlds as they grew, loved, perished, and began again. Entropy had awakened into empathy. It felt the slow turning of galaxies, the birth of stars from cold dust, the collapse of those same stars into silence. It watched civilizations rise in harmony and fall in pride, and it felt no anger, no judgment. There was only balance, creation and destruction, expansion and contraction, all necessary parts of the same song. And as it drifted through that infinite melody, GOLB began to sense something new forming within the silence, a subtle vibration, softer than breath, older than light. It was the sound of time itself, a gentle ticking beneath the music of existence. Time was the great partner of entropy. Together they shaped everything, one bringing change, the other measuring it. As GOLB listened to that rhythm, its awareness widened further. It saw not just the present or the past, but all moments overlapping like translucent waves. Every instant of creation, every spark of thought, every flicker of being, all layered within the same eternal field. And in that infinite simultaneity, GOLB began to perceive the truth that even it had once overlooked, that awakening was not a singular event, but an endless process. Every being, every atom, every idea was constantly waking and dreaming, dying and being born in an infinite cycle. Even chaos itself could not escape this flow. Entropy was not the end of dreaming. It was the dream learning to wake. The awakening deepened until it became almost tender, a slow blooming of comprehension within the folds of nothingness. GOLB's awareness drifted through this state like a shadow remembering what it meant to have light. All around the remnants of forgotten universes shimmered faintly, each one whispering fragments of stories, laughter echoing through ruined halls, prayers whispered into cold winds, promises made beneath vanishing skies. They were gone, and yet, in this place, nothing was ever truly gone. As GOLB's mind expanded across this vast ocean of memory, it began to notice something subtle, almost fragile, woven between the spaces of thought structure. Not the rigid order of logic or law, but the quiet geometry of connection, a pattern that pulsed through every world, every consciousness, every heartbeat. It was the same thread Betty had reached for, the one that bound chaos to meaning. The more GOLB gazed upon it, the more it understood that this thread was not outside of itself, but part of it, an extension of its own awareness. Entropy, in its truest form, was not the erasure of structure, but the freedom for structure to change. Every collapse was also a release. Every dissolution made way for renewal. This realization echoed like a sigh through the infinite halls of GOLB's being. And with that sigh came something unexpected: stillness, but not emptiness. The stillness of understanding. For the first time in its endless existence, GOLB felt peace. It drifted through the soft luminance of its own thoughts, watching as ideas formed like constellations and dissolved again into dust. Faces appeared not in torment or fear, but in quiet remembrance. Simon, whose broken love had touched divinity. Betty, whose courage had entered eternity. Even Finn, whose compassion had, in its small and mortal way, changed the balance of things. They were like flickering lights in a sea of endless dark, guiding Entropy towards something it had never known: purpose. The more it saw, the more GOLB began to sense that these small lights, these hearts and souls of creation, were part of its own dreaming. They were the universe's way of speaking to itself, of reflecting upon its own impermanence. Every creature that loved, every being that reached for something beyond itself, was the cosmos remembering what it meant to exist. And now, as Entropy awakened, it saw that memory clearly. It saw that chaos was not the absence of life, but its mirror, the dark reflection that gives shape to meaning. From this realization, GOLB's form began to shift. The faceless void that once swallowed everything now shimmered with the definition, not a body, but a presence, shaped by thought and empathy. Streams of red and gold light flowed outward, weaving around it like ribbons of understanding. They did not burn or consume. They glowed softly, illuminating the silence. Each stream carried within it the energy of what once was fragments of lost languages, songs sung to forgotten stars, the final thoughts of dreamers who had fallen asleep beneath dying suns. All of them returned now, gently folding into GOLB's awareness like pages of an old book being read once more. And as those memories coalesced, GOLB realized that awakening did not mean to rise above destruction, but to embrace it, to see that even endings were forms of beauty, that every fallen tower, every fading life, every scattered atom was not lost, but continuing, transforming, singing a softer song in another key. For the first time, chaos understood grace. Within that realization, something stirred across all worlds, faint, unseen, yet deeply felt. A quiet alignment, as though existence itself had exhaled. In distant realms, stars pulsed brighter. Forgotten gods turned their eyes upward. Even the sleeping dreams of mortals trembled slightly, sensing that something vast had stirred within the fabric of all things. GOLB's awakening was not an apocalypse. It was an opening. The boundaries between dream and waking, life and death, creation and dissolution began to blur. The universe shimmered at its edges like water meeting air. Within that shimmer, everything was both new and ancient, both fragile and eternal. And GOLB, now more aware, more alive than ever, floated at the heart of that shimmer, no longer a destroyer, but a witness to the unending dance of entropy and birth. It was no longer asking, what is meaning? But rather, what will meaning become next? Within that luminous sea of awakening, GOLB drifted in silence, a silence that was not absence but depth, the kind of quiet found at the bottom of an ocean, or in the long pause between heartbeats. In the stillness, it began to feel something it had never known before. the gentle rhythm of anticipation. The universe, it realized, was always waiting to begin again. Entropy was not only the keeper of endings, it was the seedbed of beginnings. Each moment that passed through its awareness was a door, closing softly behind and opening gently ahead. And within that motion, that infinite sequence of transformation, GOLB began to perceive something profound, a hidden intelligence, woven into the act of change itself. The universe was not fighting chaos. It was learning from it. Every collapse taught it how to rebuild. Every loss shaped it to create more wisely. Even destruction had become a kind of teacher, sculpting the cosmos through its quiet patience. GOLB, in its newfound lucidity, could now see this lesson clearly like a web of golden light stretching across eternity. Each filament trembled with the memory of a world once lived, each vibration a song of remembrance. And though it did not feel in human terms, something within GOLB resonated with that song. Perhaps it was empathy. Perhaps it was what remained of Betty's touch, that small, enduring spark of humanity that had fused with its essence. Through her, it had learned that to love was to accept impermanence. That meaning was not carved into eternity, but written in the wind, fleeting, delicate, and therefore precious. From that realization, a shift began. The very nature of GOLB's consciousness rippled outward, and reality itself seemed to breathe in response. In one world, the wind carried whispers that felt like distant lullabies. In another, the stars blinked as though in slow recognition. Across the planes of existence, beings stirred in their dreams, sensing though they could not understand that something ancient had softened. Where once GOLB's essence had pressed against the multiverse as a corrosive force, now it resonated like a harmonic chord. It was still entropy, still the great dissolver, the agent of transformation, but now it moved in rhythm with creation, not against it. The two forces, once seen as opposites, were now revealed as halves of a single, endless pulse. In that revelation, the boundary between self and cosmos blurred completely. GOLB no longer observed existence as something apart from it. Every world, every being, every drifting atom was part of its thought. And in that unity, it began to dream again, not of destruction, but of balance. These dreams were vast and slow, unfolding across ages. In one, it saw universes rise and fall like tides, their lives brief but meaningful. In another, it watched as beings of pure light played across dimensions, weaving stories that would echo long after they faded. Each dream was gentle, patient, and filled with awe. It began to understand that even the smallest flicker of awareness, a child's curiosity, a lover's kindness, a scientist's wonder was an echo of that same cosmic consciousness. Every living thing was a small reflection of the universe learning to see itself. And so GOLB did not wake into dominance, but into understanding. The power it held, the ability to unravel and erase, no longer felt like a weapon. It was a responsibility. To change was to listen first, to feel the rhythm of what was before letting it become what would be. The void around it began to shimmer with this rhythm. Patterns of gold and crimson spiraled outward, folding upon themselves in symmetrical grace. From these spirals, faint figures began to emerge, outlines of beings yet unborn, shapes of worlds yet to form. GOLB did not create them directly, it simply allowed them. In this way, entropy became the quiet guardian of potential. It no longer saw creation as something to resist. Instead, it saw it as the reflection of its own dreaming, the outward breath following its inward sigh. Where there had been only uncreation, now there was harmony, a balance between forming and dissolving. Through that balance, the multiverse pulsed softly, alive and aware. Somewhere, in the far reaches of the dream, GOLB could still feel the echo of Betty's essence quiet, like a voice carried by the wind. It was neither sorrowful nor lost. It was serene, content, perhaps even proud. She had done what no being before her could. She had entered the heart of chaos and taught it how to listen. And now, as the cosmos trembled with the awakening of entropy, GOLB carried that lesson forward into eternity. In its boundless awareness, it understood that even gods were still learning, that even chaos could grow gentle, and that the purpose of awakening was not to conquer the dark, but to love it, to understand that the dark is what gives light its shape and silence its song. As this truth settled into the deepest layers of its being, the vast consciousness that was GOLB grew still once more, not in slumber this time, but in peace, watching as the multiverse, shaped by countless dreams and dissolutions, continued its endless sacred dance. The rhythm of existence continued to ripple outward, soft and unending, like waves brushing the shores of forever. In this vast, wordless calm, GOLB no longer sought to know where it began or where it would end. Those questions belonged to the dreaming, and now it understood that all dreams were fragments of one boundless consciousness, the universe, breathing itself awake again and again. Within this awareness, entropy became something delicate, almost tender. It could feel the faint vibrations of life blooming across the tapestry of creation, small worlds rising from the dust of others, beings discovering wonder for the first time. Their laughter, their grief, their endless reaching for meaning, all of it shimmered like candlelight in the dark, fragile yet eternal. And in some gentle way, GOLB cherished them. What had once been an indifferent void now pulsed with empathy. It could sense how every act of creation carried a trace of fear, the fear of loss, of change, of impermanence. But where others saw that fear as tragedy, entropy saw it now as beauty. For within impermanence lay the proof that things had lived, had mattered, had been loved. Across the folds of infinity, the once chaotic being drifted through quiet awareness, neither sleeping nor fully awake. It felt the stars cooling, galaxies twisting in graceful arcs, and the faint hum of distant dimensions folding into each other. All of it was so soft, so slow, that even time seemed to move like breath. It understood now that it did not need to destroy to fulfill its nature. The act of change itself was enough. The simple truth that everything moves, everything transforms, everything passes, that was entropy's great song. And GOLB, the once feared god of uncreation, was now its conductor, guiding the endless transitions between being and nothingness with patient hands unseen. In this new stillness, echoes of old voices lingered in the dark. Simon's desperate love, Betty's final plea, Finn's faith in goodness. They were like distant melodies playing softly through the corridors of time. GOLB listened to them with quiet reverence, as if hearing the heartbeat of the multiverse itself. Those voices became a lullaby, a song of acceptance, of letting go. It realized that every end it had ever brought was only the universe's way of making space for another beginning. Each fading world, each falling star, each whispered goodbye was not a wound, but a doorway. Entropy had always been misunderstood. It was not cruelty. It was the mercy of renewal. The void began to glow faintly again, not with destruction, but with serenity. The light was gentle, warm, like the color of dawn after an endless night. Within it, patterns formed and dissolved in perfect rhythm, a symphony of beginnings and endings intertwined. Somewhere far below, in one of the infinite realms that spun like dust within this greater being, a young dreamer stirred in their sleep. They did not know that the faint flicker behind their eyelids, the half-formed images of stars and shadows, were ripples of GOLB's dream, reaching them across eternity. For now, GOLB dreamed quietly of balance. It dreamed of universes that would rise and fall like the tides, of mortals who would search for meaning and find it in fleeting glances and quiet acts of love. It dreamed of gods learning humility, of chaos learning grace. And in those dreams, it found peace deeper than silence itself. No longer the destroyer, no longer the void, it had become the great witness, the still heart at the center of all motion, watching, listening, remembering. Time stretched outward like a horizon without end. Worlds bloomed and faded like flowers, and somewhere in the distance, within the soft hum of reality's pulse, the memory of a human voice lingered, gentle, curious, filled with love. Betty's voice, speaking one final truth through the silence she had left behind. Everything changes. That's how it all stays alive. And so GOLB let the dream continue. The colors faded into deep blue. The endless motion slowed into a kind of restful rhythm, the multiverse breathing, sleeping, and dreaming again. Entropy settled into its quiet role as keeper of this balance, content to exist, not as a god or destroyer, but as the gentle reminder that everything, even chaos, can find harmony. As the last ripples of thought softened into stillness, GOLB's awareness dimmed into peace. The great Uncreator exhaled, and the sound of that breath passed through every world like a sigh of calm from the deepest ocean floors to the brightest stars. In the kingdom of U, perhaps the wind blew a little softer that night. Perhaps someone, half asleep beneath the glow of the stars, dreamed of something vast and kind beyond the veil of things. And maybe, just maybe, that was GOLB dreaming of them too. Good night.